Hi again. So now we're going to be talking about rotations. We just talked about translations and reflections, and so rotations, instead of shifting up, down, left, right, or flipping over something, it turns the shape. So there are several different ways we can turn the shape, but we're only going to be talking about three today. We can either go 90 degrees clockwise, 90 degrees counterclockwise, or 180 degrees. And with that 180 degrees, we don't say if it's clockwise or counterclockwise, because whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise, it would end up in the same place. So instead of just looking at the graph and being able to tell, for the first two examples, we should be able to tell on these ones, but when we're actually trying to draw the shape, we're going to use these formulas. It's way easier, in my opinion, to use these formulas rather than just try and place the points on the graph. So when we go 90 degrees clockwise, our point, which is regularly just xy, will change to y comma negative x, which tells me, or which means that what we're going to do is take the point and flip it around so that the x becomes the y and the y becomes the x, but then make that back point negative or change the sign on it. Now, the 90 degrees counterclockwise is really similar. When we go from xy, we go from xy to negative y comma x. So once again, we're going to flip them around so that our x becomes our y and our y becomes our x. But instead of making that back number negative or flipping the sign on the back, we flip the sign on the front number. And then the 180 degrees is actually the easiest because our xy point goes from xy to negative x comma negative y, so we just flip the signs on both of them. I'll show you how to deal with that in those last two examples, but let's start with the first two examples where we're just going to look at the two shapes and determine what happened, whether they went 90 degrees clockwise, 90 degrees counterclockwise, or 180 degrees. So for our first example, we have the shape ABCD, and it rotated to be that A prime, B prime, C prime, D prime. Now, the easy way to kind of think about this is if the shape moved one quadrant, then it's a 90 degrees. And if the shape moved two quadrants, then it's 180 degrees. So let me show you with my pen. Oh, wrong thing. So I'm thinking like I started in quadrant one. My white shape started in quadrant one, and I shifted down one and then over one. So I shifted two quadrants. Or I could have said I shifted to the left one and then down one. Whether I go left and then down or down and then left, it doesn't really matter because I moved two spaces, I automatically know that I rotated 180 degrees. So that's our answer. We rotated 180 degrees. And once again, we don't need to say clockwise or counterclockwise because whether you do it one way or the other, it'll be the same. It'll end up in the same place. Now on number two, if we shift only one quadrant, we know it's a 90 degrees. So we went from the white shape to the blue shape. Okay, great, which means I just went down one quadrant. Okay, that's a 90 degrees. We know that. Now we've got to decide if it's clockwise or counterclockwise. And this should be easy for you. The clock rotates like this, where the arrows go like this. So this is clockwise. So because our arrow is going down like that, around like down and to the right, I guess you could say, then this is 90 degrees clockwise. Okay, so for examples 3 and 4, we're going to use those formulas that I have up at the top. This one, for number 3, it says rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise. So I'm going to go back up here and find the one that says 90 degrees counterclockwise, which is the xy turns to negative y, negative x. So I'm going to write that down right here. xy turns to negative y, x. And what we're going to do is actually just figure out what the points are of this shape. So point X is originally, let's see, it looks like 4 comma negative 1. Point Y is originally 3 comma negative 5. And then point Z, or not point Z, we should say point W. Let me erase that. Point W is 0 comma negative 3. All right, so those are my original XY points. Now I'm going to change them so that it's negative Y, negative X. So or negative Y comma X. So what I'm going to do is I flip-flop the X and the Y, so it becomes negative 1 comma 4, or negative 5 comma 3, or negative 3 comma 0. But that's just me flip-flopping the X and the Y. Now I've got to make that Y negative, or I've got to flip the sign on the new front number, which means that the negative 1 on the top would become positive 1. So I'm going to just take the negative away. And then the negative 5 in the middle point would become a positive 5, and the negative 3 would become a positive 3. And that's all because that Y in that formula is negative. That just means we switch the sign. So now I have these new points, and what I'm going to do is plot those new points on this graph. So 1, 4 would give me this point, which is our new X, so we're going to call it X prime. And then Y gives me 5, 3, and I'm going to be right in all of my what I wrote down. That's my new Y, so Y prime. Then the last number is 3, 0, or the last point is 3, 0, and that's my new W, so W prime. And now I just connect all the dots. So once again, these shapes aren't changing. They're not getting bigger or smaller. They're just rotating or turning. Okay, let's do the same thing for question number 4. So on this one, it's asking us to rotate 180 degrees. And the rule or the formula for it is X comma Y turns to negative X comma negative Y. So basically, we're just going to flip-flop the signs on everything. But once again, it's going to be easiest if we just write down all of the points first, and then we change them, and then graph them. So I'm going to start with point T, and point T is at 3 comma 0. Then let's go to point U. Point U is at 2 comma 3, and then point V is at 3 comma 3. Now let's change them all so that they just flip-flop the signs. So all of these are positive, which means we're going to make everything negative. So T will end up being negative 3 comma, we could say negative 0, but 0 can't be negative, so we're just going to leave it 0. If it was any other number, we could make it negative. Then U will become negative 2, negative 3, and V will become negative 3, negative 3. Now let's plot these points. So negative 3, 0 will go right here. So that's my new T. Then negative 2, negative 3 will be right here. So that's my new U. And then negative 3 is right here. So that's my new V. And now let's just connect the points. And there we have it. That's 180 degree rotation. You do not need to memorize these formulas or setups. You have a cheat sheet with them on there. But just make sure that you feel comfortable looking at that cheat sheet and understanding what it's talking about. So this is how we rotate shapes.